But it's your sister's birthday, my father said, light, almost amused, like I'd called to cancel a brunch. The fluorescent lights above me hummed. Somewhere down the hall a monitor chirped in polite beeps, as if grief should cue and take a number. My hands were shaking so hard the phone rattled against my ear. I could smell asphalt and winter radiator heat still clinging to my coat. The nurse had pressed a cup of water into my palm I hadn't managed to lift. Hi everyone, my name is Alara Quinn, 29, and tonight I learned there are silences that bruise. My husband's shoes were still in our hallway, laces loose the way he left them. Our son's backpack, dinosaurs and smudged markers, waited by the door for a morning that had already been erased. I called my dad because daughters are supposed to, because somewhere I still believed he'd finally show up as a father in the moment that mattered most. Don't make this about you, Alara, he added, voice dipping into that familiar reprimand. We've got a dinner. Your mother's picked out balloons. You know how she gets. A paper crinkled in my lap, release forms I couldn't read through the shimmering blur. The ER doors breathed open and shut, carrying other people's storms. I could hear the nurse asking someone softly, "Do you have anyone to call?" I had called. And my father had turned my emergency into an inconvenience on the calendar. I thought of birthdays at our house growing up, my sister's candles bright and crowded, mine flickering in the draft of a kitchen window that never closed right. Of his wallet for her, his lectures for me. Of the way he said family, like a club with dues I was always behind on. Dad, I said, holding the word steady, tasting salt. My husband is gone. Our son is in the ICU. Pause. A small exhale, almost a chuckle. Well, what a day to choose. We'll come by after cake. Try to be composed. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I watched the blue call timer blink and understood something cold and exact. There are people who will step over your broken heart to keep their shoes clean. I pressed end. The screen went black. The phone's reflection showed a face I almost didn't recognize. Mine, but emptied and sharpened. Behind me, a doctor cleared his throat, a folder held like a verdict, and the hallway lights felt suddenly colder, like they were counting down to whatever I had to become next. The doctor's lips moved, but for a moment all I heard was the muffled roar of my own pulse. His folder clicked open. Paper, ink, medical codes that turned love into statistics. Your son is stable for now, he said carefully, like each word was being tested for weight before it landed. But the head trauma, it's unpredictable. We'll need to monitor him closely. Stable. Unpredictable. My body floated somewhere above the chair while those words etched themselves into me. I wanted to hold on to them, but my fingers were numb, my arms heavy. When the door shut, the room inhaled silence again. I bent forward, clutching the cup of water the nurse had left earlier. Still full. Still untouched. My throat had closed like a fist. And then my phone buzzed. I half expected it to be Dad calling back, maybe to say he'd misheard me, maybe to apologize. But no. It was a group text. Happy birthday, Serena. Complete with glitter emojis, champagne flutes, and a family photo from a restaurant booth. My dad in the center, beaming. My mother's arm around my sister, who was glowing in some new silk dress. Not a single mention of my husband's accident. Not a word about my son lying in an ICU bed, fighting shadows I couldn't see. Just balloons and cake and smiles wide enough to erase me. Hi, I thought, pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth until it hurt. My name is Alara, and I have just discovered what grief tastes like. Not ashes, but frosting smeared on someone else's plate while your world burns. I tucked the phone away. If I looked any longer, I might have shattered it against the hospital tiles. Instead I stood. My legs quivered as if learning to walk again. I pressed my palm to the ICU window. My little boy lay small beneath wires and machines, chest rising slow, stubborn, alive. He was the only family I had left, the only proof I was still tethered here. I whispered through the glass, I won't let them take anything else from us. And as my reflection blurred against the sterile glass, something inside me hardened, quiet but unyielding. The kind of resolve that didn't break. It waited. It planned. Remembered. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds like knives. Hospitals never sleep, but there was something cruel about dawn arriving when your world hadn't reset. Nurses moved in measured rhythms, machines hummed, and my son's chest rose and fell with mechanical stubbornness. I counted each breath like beads on a rosary. A knock on the door. My Aunt Clara stepped inside, tall, brisk, wearing the same worry she'd worn my whole life. She wrapped her arms around me before I could resist. For a moment, I let myself sink into her warmth. She whispered, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'll stay as long as you need." That was the thing. Clara wasn't technically blood. She had married my mother's brother, divorced him years later, yet somehow she remained more family than the people who shared my DNA. "I called Dad," I confessed, voice breaking on the word. "He said it was Serena's birthday." Clara pulled back, eyes sharp with disbelief, then darkened with a knowing fury. "Of course he did. He's always been blind when it comes to her." Her words should have comforted me, but instead they set my teeth on edge. This wasn't blindness. It was deliberate. My pain had been weighed against a dinner party and I had lost. Hours bled into each other. Clara fetched coffee, spoke with doctors, helped me navigate insurance forms. Each form carried my husband's name. Each signature made the reality heavier. Widow. Single mother. Survivor. That night I slipped into the hospital chapel. Empty pews, flickering candles. The silence here was different. Less clinical, more ancient. I lowered myself onto the wood and pressed my forehead against folded hands that didn't know how to pray. And in that stillness, memory cut through. Dad years ago telling me I was too dramatic, too needy, while Serena leaned against him, laughing, golden, untouchable. I saw the pattern now. It wasn't favoritism, it was strategy. My sister was his investment. I was his liability. When I returned to my son's bedside, I placed my hand over his. "I'll protect you," I whispered. For the first time since the accident, his eyelids fluttered as if he'd heard me. And in that small movement I felt the first spark of something more dangerous than grief. Purpose. 3 days blurred together like one endless corridor of antiseptic air, vending machine coffee, and whispered updates from doctors who never looked me fully in the eye. My son clung stubbornly to the line between here and gone, each monitor beep a fragile anchor. On the 4th day I finally walked outside. The air was cold, sharp, alive in a way I wasn't. Cars hissed by on wet pavement. Somewhere across town my family was probably still celebrating Serena. Her birthday gifts, her sparkling photos, her life uninterrupted by mine. When I returned to the waiting room, Clara was frowning down at her phone. "Elara," she said carefully, "they posted pictures." She turned the screen toward me. There was my father raising a toast. My mother with her arm looped around Serena's waist. Cake, candles, champagne. A glittering caption, "Family first." Nothing more important. I laughed then. Too loud. Too raw. Heads turned. Claire gripped my wrist. "Don't let them break you." But they already had. My father's words echoed in my skull like a cruel mantra. "But it's your sister's birthday." That night, when the hospital quieted, I opened my laptop to check bills, insurance claims, anything to keep from unraveling. Instead, I saw an email. Subject: settlement information. The insurance company confirmed what the officer had hinted at the night of the crash. A payout. Significant. A number so large it didn't feel real. Blood money dressed in neat zeros. I stared at it until my vision blurred. My husband was dead, my son was fractured, and someone believed a check could balance the scales. The door creaked. Claire peeked in. "You should try to rest." Instead I whispered, "They'll want this." Clara's eyes narrowed. She didn't ask who. She already knew. I leaned back in the chair, numbness giving way to a slow burn in my chest. My father hadn't shown up for the accident, the ICU, or me. But for money? He'd appear with open hands. And I realized something then, staring at the monitor, tracing my son's heartbeat. Sometimes grief isn't the heaviest thing you carry. Sometimes it's betrayal, coiled tight, waiting for the moment it can finally be set down. Like a blade pressed into the right hand at the right time. The clock on the wall ticked forward, and I began to imagine how sharp justice could sound when spoken in silence. A week after the accident, it happened, just as I'd predicted. The ICU hall smelled faintly of bleach when my father walked in, suit pressed, cologne sharp, as if he were arriving at a board meeting rather than a hospital where his grandson clung to life. My mother trailed behind him, eyes darting to avoid mine. And Serena, of course, dressed in pale pink like a porcelain doll, her perfume slicing through the sterile air. "Elara," Dad said, voice smooth but rehearsed. "We need to talk." Not how are you? Not is he stable? Not even a whisper of my husband's name. Just a need wrapped in authority. Clara shifted beside me, protective as a shadow. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, like I was performing for an audience I no longer respected. Now you want to talk? I asked. My father cleared his throat, lips tightening. We heard about the settlement. It's substantial. Your mother and I believe the fair thing, the responsible thing, would be to divide it. 50-50. You keep half, Serena keeps half. Family shares the burden. The words dropped like poison. My husband's death, my son's pain, turned into a commodity. Half for me. Half for the daughter who hadn't even left her birthday dinner long enough to send a text. I stared at them, my pulse steady, my voice quiet. 50%, I repeated as if tasting the absurdity. Serena stepped forward, her eyes glistening, her voice dripping with feigned compassion. It's not about the money, Alara. It's about family. We've always shared everything. Everything? I thought of childhood dinners where my plate was smaller, birthdays with half the candles, love rationed like currency. They had shared nothing with me but absence. Clara's hand pressed lightly against my arm, a silent anchor. I looked at my father, then really looked at him. The man who had chosen convenience over compassion, image over blood. You want half? I said, my tone razor thin. Half of what's left of me? The room stilled. Even the monitor seemed to hesitate. And in that charged silence I realized, grief had hollowed me, but it had also carved a new shape. Something sharper, unbreakable. I smiled without warmth. We'll see about that. They weren't used to resistance. My father's jaw flexed, the same expression he wore when a business deal slipped through his fingers. Serena shifted uncomfortably, though her manicured nails stayed curled around the strap of her designer purse. My mother coughed lightly as if to remind us all to keep things civilized. Alara, Dad said again, lower now, don't make this ugly. We're not asking for all of it, just our share. Think of it as an investment in your sister's future. He's planning a wedding. A home. A laugh scraped its way up my throat, raw and bitter. My husband was buried less than 10 days, my son still beneath wires and monitors. And my father dared to frame theft as generosity. Clara stepped closer, her voice like steel. She owes you nothing. Not 1 cent. Dad's eyes cut to her with disdain. This is a family matter. Outsiders don't decide. Funny, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, because when I called you from the year begging for help you chose to be an outsider too. Remember? But it's your sister's birthday. The words hit. For a second his face cracked. Anger, shame, something dark flickered. Serena shifted again, lips parting in protest, but I raised a hand. Don't, I whispered. You've already had your celebration. You don't get mine. The tension thickened, wrapping around us until even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder. Finally, Dad exhaled, slow, calculated. You'll regret this. Don't shut out the only family you've got. I glanced through the ICU glass at my son, my only family. His tiny chest rose and fell against the rhythm of machines. He was the reason I hadn't collapsed, the reason I'd learned to stand taller. I've already been shut out my whole life, I replied softly. This time I'm the one closing the door. They left in silence, their perfume and cologne lingering long after their footsteps faded. Claire placed a hand on my back. You know they won't give up, she murmured. I nodded. My father's greed wasn't a storm that blew over. It was a tide that returned again and again, trying to claim what wasn't his. But I was ready now. And in the reflection of the ACU glass, I saw not the grieving widow I had been, but a woman sharpening into someone my father would never recognize until it was too late. The threats didn't take long to arrive. 2 days later, I opened my inbox to a lawyer's letter drafted in stiff, sterile language. My parents had filed a claim, petitioning for equitable distribution of the settlement. Equitable. As if fairness had ever lived under their roof. I read it once. Twice. The words blurred not from shock but from the weight of something darker. Confirmation. My father hadn't spoken out of anger in that hospital room. He'd spoken a plan. And now it was unfolding in black ink and letterhead. Clara found me in the waiting room, fingers clenched around the papers. They actually did it, she whispered. I handed her the letter. She scanned, her mouth tightening. They're monsters. I shook my head slowly. No. Monsters are fables. This is worse. Monsters you can't mistake for family. For the next hours I sat by my son's bed, staring at his small hand resting against mine. Each beep of the monitor became a promise. I will fight. I will not let them turn his father's death into a transaction. That night I dug through old boxes Clara had brought from my house. Worn receipts, photo albums, tax folders. My fingers brushed against something my husband had always been meticulous about. Records. Insurance policies. Statements. Notes. Everything filed neatly labeled. He trusted me to carry his order into chaos. And buried inside I found it, the clause. Plain, unshakable, written in simple type. Beneficiary, spouse. Exclusively. Non-transferable. The legalese was dry but its meaning pulsed like thunder. No loopholes. No room for greedy hands. The settlement was mine, and mine alone. I leaned back in the plastic chair, exhaustion tugging at me, but a flicker of something fierce igniting. My father thought he was cornering me. He hadn't realized I was standing on ground my husband had already fortified. Clara looked over, worry in her eyes. What now? I closed the folder, pressing it tight to my chest. Now, I whispered, we let them come to court. Because some justice isn't loud. Some justice is paperwork that burns hotter than fire. And as the machines hummed steady, I felt the edges of my grief sharpening into a blade made of resolve. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and stale coffee. My parents sat across the aisle, Serena between them like a polished ornament. Dad's jaw was set in stone. Mom's pearls trembled against her throat whenever she shifted. Their lawyer shuffled papers with the confidence of someone who believed greed could wear a suit and pass as justice. I sat quietly, Clara at my side, the folder of documents resting on my lap. My husband's handwriting marked every tab, every signature, every careful note he'd left behind. Even in death he was still protecting me. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Proceedings began. Their lawyer spoke first, rehearsed and oily. Your Honor, we're simply asking for equitable distribution. A family should share both burdens and blessings. Our client's daughter, Serena, deserves support as much as Alara. He said my name like it was a nuisance, a parenthesis in someone else's story. When it was my turn I rose. My legs trembled but my voice did not. I placed the documents on the bench. Your Honor, I began, steady and clear, this settlement was issued as compensation for the death of my husband. It is not an inheritance. It is not communal property. It is survival. For me. For my son. I slid the clause forward. Black ink. Binding language. Beneficiary, spouse. Exclusively. Non-transferable. The judge adjusted his glasses, read silently, then looked at me. His voice cut through the tension. It appears the settlement is legally assigned to Mrs. Quinn alone. No division. No claims. A hush rippled through the courtroom. My father's face flushed crimson, his lips pressed so tight they blanched white. Serena's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. My mother looked away as if the pearls around her neck had turned into shackles. I inhaled deeply. Not triumph. Not gloating. Just release. Years of being the forgotten daughter, the overlooked shadow, the afterthought. It all dissolved into a single truth spoken aloud by the law itself. I was enough to stand on my own. Clara squeezed my hand. My son's small smile flickered in my memory, brighter than any candle on Serena's cake. As the gavel struck, I whispered to myself, not revenge, not rage, but something quieter, stronger, final.